My name is Parastu Imami, and I'm the host of The Road to Success for Your Highly Sensitive Child. This podcast is about empowering parents of highly sensitive children to nurture their child's unique personality trait and create a path to success. Our podcast provides guidance, insights, and support to help you unlock your child's full potential, fostering resilience, confidence, and a bright future. If you're new to my podcast, please go back and listen to episodes 1 and 2 because they provide information on high sensitivity that all subsequent episodes will build upon. If you skip these episodes, you won't get as much out of this and all subsequent episodes. To book a private coaching session with me, please visit my website at parentinghsc.com. If you're looking for a talented portrait photographer, I highly recommend Laurie Bishop of Become Studios. Check her website out at www.becomebeseen.com. You can find this link in my podcast description as well. For a limited time, if you use the promo code PARASTU100, you will get $100 credit towards photo purchases. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're diving into an important and often misunderstood topic, highly sensitive children versus children with ADHD. I know many parents out there are wondering, what are the differences? Where do these traits overlap? And how can we support our children effectively? To help us unpack all of this, I'm thrilled to be joined by Ms. Karen Rosenquist, an educator who has been working with neurodiverse children for the past 10 years. Welcome, Karen. It's so great to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here with you.
Thank you. Before we dive in, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, of course. Well, let's see. I have been working, as you said, with neurodiverse students for about 10 years. My journey began because I have a neurodiverse son who's now in college. He is diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. So I then founded a school specifically for children with dyslexia. ADHD and dyslexia are highly comorbid, so many of the students in our school have a combined diagnosis. And then I was so interested in this, I returned to get a second master's in mind, brain, and teaching to look at the neuroscience of learning for neurodiverse students at Johns Hopkins University. So that is what I bring to today's conversation.
That's so impressive. What an amazing background that you have. Thank you so much. I'm sure our listeners would be so grateful to learn from your experience and your knowledge. So let's dive in. So many parents feel unsure about whether their child has ADHD or whether their child is a highly sensitive child. So let's talk about the differences, or let's talk about what each of them are. So I'll start by talking about what makes a child highly sensitive.
Great.
So highly sensitive children have high sensitivity has 4 components, and the child has to have all 4 components to be considered highly sensitive. The first component is depth of processing. That means the child takes in a lot from their environment. When they are observing things, they're observing from every angle, from every which way, and they're processing that very deeply. The second thing is overstimulation, because they process everything very deeply, and because of the fact that they feel emotions very deeply, they get overwhelmed easily. That is only if they don't know how to regulate their nervous system. So if they don't know how to regulate their emotions, they will get overstimulated. But the good news is that I work with parents all the time to teach them techniques that would help them regulate the nervous system of their child. And then number three is empathy and emotional awareness. So a highly sensitive child has empathy to the nth degree. I mean, their empathy is so strong that, for example, if you have a headache, they will feel your headache. Or if you're sad, I have clients tell me that, my child will go and just randomly hug their teacher, and the teacher would say, I don't know how your child knew I didn't talk about it, but I was really sad that day. So it's really impressive how deep they can feel. And then the other thing is that they're very attuned to other people. So it's not just empathy, but it's also this emotional sensitivity that they have on top of the empathy. And then the fourth aspect, I'm sorry, the third, did I do? No, this was the third. So the fourth aspect is being affected by various stimuli, external stimuli. Like it could be bright lights, loud sounds, taste, something that tastes weird or different to them, texture, like clothing that's really scratchy or like wool clothing, and so on. And so like I said, the child must have all four components to be considered highly sensitive, and this is a personality trait that is genetic, which means that both one or both parents must have this trait as well, because it's passed down to the child. So if you feel like your child is highly sensitive based on what I just mentioned, then you want to kind of figure out if you or your spouse or both of you are highly sensitive as well, because everything that I teach really helps the adults as well. It's not just, this podcast is for children, but it's really meant to be used by anyone who's highly sensitive. So now if you could tell us about how, what is ADHD?
Sure. Well, ADHD, unlike what you've described, there are not discrete characteristics for which it's true for all children with ADHD. So ADHD can present different ways. You can be inattentive ADHD. You can be more hyper ADHD. Sometimes children can be combined, inattentive and hyper. It doesn't look one way, so it is challenging to identify. And there are some things you said that are overlapping. Children with ADHD do become overstimulated quite a lot. Along with that, they can be distracted and have a hard time focusing. That's kind of the hallmark, is that they have a hard time focusing. However, ADHD also is not, it's not a nervous system, an issue with the nervous system. It's a brain-based difference. So the brain has a set of global functions, executive functions. When that is off, children with ADHD tend to struggle. So for example, children with ADHD, some characteristic signs might be impulsivity, might be high distractibility, like you mentioned, sensitive to all kinds of different stimuli around them. And that can also be the case when they're doing something academically challenging, versus say something that they're interested in that's self-soothing. So if they're doing something self-soothing, their focus might be great. But if you're in a classroom setting where it's challenging or not necessarily intellectually stimulating, they will be distracted by all these other stimuli. So, or they may just zone out, and that can look very complacent, and difficult to identify, because if you're zoning out and you're not a distraction for the other students, and the teacher may not notice it depending on how many students. So it's a challenge to say there are any set criteria that all children with ADHD need to meet. However, there are similarities with what you've described. Sensitivity, overstimulation are the two that stand out most.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a very great explanation. Let's talk about the diagnosis process. What should parents expect when seeking a diagnosis for ADHD?
Well, the first thing, if you suspect or say an educator that is working with your child suspects, is to find a child psychologist who can diagnose ADHD. Sometimes pediatricians will do it. Mostly it's child psychologists. And there are a series of screeners that they will look for tests. Oftentimes it will involve surveying the student, depending on how young they are. They will complete a self-survey. There's a survey for parents, and there's a survey for educators. If the child's in a different system, it'll be clinician, whoever else might be working for that, who sees that child in a different setting. And then the child psychologist will meet with them. They will give them a series of tests to look at their focus, to their ability generally to recall a group of things. So that's their working memory, because quite often children with ADHD have their working memory is a bit compromised, so their ability to remember sets of things or instructions and orders can be limited. So they look at various signs, because it is hard to diagnose, and it's a continuum. So the more, for example, the more obvious the behaviors, the more impulsivity, the more dramatic the inattentiveness, those are pretty clear. It's the gray area that gets harder to diagnose. Unfortunately, a lot of children are not considered for ADHD because it's just considered poor behavior. Because if you're disruptive in class, it might just be poor behavior or something going on. And so it makes it difficult to get to the root of what is really going on for a child. And I just want to caution people not to jump to an ADHD conclusion until they've had a thorough assessment, because there is a stigma about the label.
Yeah, same thing for a highly sensitive child, unfortunately, which is really unfortunate because I think the name is just not a very suitable name to use, just because, especially in countries like the US, sensitivity is not celebrated. And it's looked upon as a weakness when it truly isn't. It's actually a huge superpower to have. And that's why I'm here. This is the reason that I got into this work, is because I myself suffered a lot with being a highly sensitive person. And I suffered a lot as a child. It took me probably 30 years, if not more, to heal from all the various traumas that I had as a child. And so I don't want other children to go through what I went through. And I'm hoping that by educating people, I can prevent, at least, even if I help one person out, I feel like I won, like it's a win, even if it's just one person. Luckily for me, I have helped a lot more people than just one person. So it's been really rewarding. But it is sad that, that it's looked upon, both ADHD and high sensitivity. The children have superpowers that we overlook because we only focus on the things that are negative. And so let's talk about the diagnosis process for highly sensitive children. Because the problem is that a lot of people don't even know what high sensitivity is. They just guess that, oh, it's someone that cries. Well, no, it has 4 components. It's a pretty, there's a lot to it. So There is a diagnosis process, but it's not, because it's not a medical condition. It's a genetic personality trait. Therefore, it's there, doctors, nurses, teachers, they don't know about it. Even psychologists don't know about it. It's very rare that I would find a psychologist that knows exactly what high sensitivity is. So as a result, you really need to find an expert who can take Dr. Elaine's survey or quiz and basically walk you through taking that quiz. Because if you take it on your own, you can take it on your own, but it may not be accurate, because you have to really think back to as far back as possible. So when your child was a baby, for example, when it was a newborn, how did it, take those four components that we talked about and think when the child was very tiny, baby, how did they react? Did they meet these four criteria? Because as we grow older, we want to, as a coping mechanism, we change and we adapt to our environment. And so the components may not be showing prevalently because that person is hiding it. They're masking it. They're pretending to be something they're not because they need to fit in. They need to, make sure that they're coping, that it's a type of survival mechanism. So the test is very important to take with a expert, such as myself or somebody else who's also an expert in this field. And it's free, at least from my perspective, it's free. I don't charge my clients to do the test. And the test was developed by Dr. Elaine, Aron, and it's very accurate. And it's very easy. It's like a 5-minute test.
So because it's genetic, the parent will also have the four criteria? Is that it has to be one parent also has to be?
Yes, at least one parent. Yeah, it usually doesn't skip a generation, but if it does, it's very rare that it would skip a generation. So if it does, you have to think about the grandparents, biological, both parents, obviously, biological parents and biological grandparents. Okay, great. So we talked about the diagnosis. Next, I want to talk about the overlap. So you already mentioned some of the overlap. For high sensitivity, it's, the overstimulation. And I want to say, yes, this is an overlap, but you have to take it in context. And that's when you decide, is my child highly sensitive? Or does my child have ADHD? Because for a highly sensitive child, they get overstimulated only if they're not feeling safe, or it's a new environment that they've never been exposed to, and they might get overstimulated by, it depends on the situation. So if it's something that there's a lot to take in, they may feel overstimulated. But it's not something that happens all the time. And it's, like I said, it's manageable. Like if they know how to practice, I teach my clients somatic techniques. And if they use somatic techniques, then they can regulate their nervous system. So they can really control this part of their high sensitivity. And the other overlap that I see is their emotional response to external stimuli, like loud sounds, bright lights. Again, this is a overlap. However, it's because it's the source of it, the root cause of it is different. So for a highly sensitive child, the reason that they might be sensitive to these things is because they feel deeply. Because, for example, because they're sensitive, because their nervous system, it's a nervous system personality trait where their nervous system is finely tuned. Because of that, they're getting, might be sensitive to loud sounds, for example. I I'm sensitive to all my senses, so I can hear things that nobody can hear around me if they're not highly sensitive, or if they're highly sensitive but they don't have that sensitivity. And people will be like, I don't hear it, I don't hear it. And then we'll get closer to the source of the sound, and they're like, oh my God, you're right, I hear it now. But it's just,
Right.
how I'm wired, and it's not something we can change. That's one thing I want to make clear, is that a highly sensitive child will always have these four components. You cannot take it out of them. It's something they're born with. It's a genetic trait, the same way that you have brown eyes or blue eyes and you can't change it. It's the same thing. And the third thing that I see as an overlap is sometimes highly sensitive children can have issues communicating. And that could be, again, the root cause is different. The root cause is they're overstimulated, or they feel threatened somehow, and they go into the fight or flight response. And a lot of times teachers think, oh my God, your child is so rude, they won't respond to me in class. And it's not because they're rude, it's just because they're not able to, because they freeze. And that's just because they don't feel safe. Maybe it's the way you talk to them, maybe it's your tone of voice, maybe it's the energy that they can sense in you. It could be different things, but it's definitely not because the child is rude or the child is trying to be disrespectful.
Yeah. So for children with ADHD, what I would say more often is not the inhibition to speak, but the impulsivity to say the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a reaction to something, and the emotional self-regulation and self-awareness, they react to the stimuli, as opposed to kind of taking a beat and having a kind of a metacognitive moment where they're self-aware and going, okay, this is not a moment where I should probably say something because I'm feeling upset.
Mm-hmm.
But so, I think to your point, I see how from what you're describing, there can be overlap in terms of mischaracterizing behaviors. And as we've said, they're labels that aren't particularly flattering often. And so I always really encourage people to not rush to making assessments about what something is, and really go and get that diagnosis. The other thing is, the child has ADHD, most likely they're amenable to medication and those stimulants. And it sounds like that would not benefit children who are in the highly sensitive
That's right.
category.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Because
that
it's
would be a
not
very
a
important
medical.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for pointing that out. That's a really great observation on your side, because yeah, a highly sensitive children, it's a personality trait and it's not a medical condition. Therefore, they don't need a medication. That's why, to your point, it's very important to go through the diagnosis, because if your child gets misdiagnosed, and if they're highly sensitive and they get misdiagnosed as being ADHD, then you're giving them medication that they don't need, and that won't help them,
Right,
you know?
right, exactly.
And then, so now let's talk about impact on school performance, because this is actually really important with both highly sensitive children and children who have ADHD. So let's talk about how, what should parents and teachers watch for in a school setting to support the children who have ADHD, and then I'll talk about HSC.
Sure. Well, I would say, first of all, children with this profile with ADHD often hear a lot of negative messages, far more negative than positive throughout the day. As simple as sit down, be quiet, stop that. Even if it's done, it's the repetition of that starts to accumulate. And the detrimental effect is not only their academic outcome, but their social emotional well-being and their perception of themselves. So they tend to think of themselves as the troublemaker, the class clown. And then that stops their enthusiasm for learning, their self-perception themselves as a learner, as a community member, starts to take a hit. And I think that's, for parents, something you really need to be as attentive to as the academic implications of these diagnoses, because it's a whole child. So, you need a child who not only who first of all has to be in a state of learning readiness, meaning they're not in fight or flight mode, that they're engaged in their learning, and that engagement has a lot to do with their perception of themselves as learners. And if they've heard all these negative messages, they're going to start developing compensatory negative habits to compensate, or they might just withdraw. So I always tell parents, make sure if you have a child you suspect there's ADHD, make sure you support their strengths and give them extra props for the things they do well. And what they accomplish throughout their day, because more than likely they've heard a lot of negative comments throughout their academic day. But more to your point, ADHD can, if you're inattentive and you're spacing out and you miss instructions that the teacher gives, and then you go on, you don't know how to do a lesson, and then you don't do it well, you might, as a parent, hear, gosh, so-and-so, when I checked in with her, she got it, but then I went back and at the end of the day, she didn't do half of it. Well, that might be because they checked out. It's not necessarily that she didn't understand the content. It may just be that she didn't understand the instructions or really absorb them until the teacher went over and gave them one-to-one input where there was direct, what I want to say, the teacher was able to see that the child took in the information. If they're not focusing, of course, as the work becomes more challenging, this is more for middle school and high school students, where the workload and the cognitive, the content demands increase. They may have been able to hold it together in elementary school, where they're doing the foundational work because they're bright, because they're smart. But then as the depth of the content increases, their ability to focus on it for a sustained period decreases, and that they find hard. So they need a lot of breaks. So if your child is coming home exhausted cognitively, has headaches, these might just be symptoms of their fatigue trying to hold it together, when actually what their brain wants to do is look around or get relief from what is cognitively challenging. Mm-hmm. So in our school setting, it's expected that children can sustain interest for 45 to 55 minutes for a whole class period. That's not the case for all students. So when that isn't the case, their ability to sustain focus and potentially give the answers and write and do more complex academic activities goes down, even though they're intellectually very capable and fully understand the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so thank you for that. That was such a great explanation. And I learned so much from that. And actually, I realized that a lot of it is applicable to highly sensitive children as well, because I always tell my clients that it's so important for you to know your child so well. You understand your child. It starts with, before you could advocate for your child at school, you have to understand your child inside out. You have to know what are their likes, what are their dislikes, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. Just keep track of how they behave in certain environments, in certain situations, and so that you know your child so well that you can advocate for them in school. Because a lot of things could be the case for highly sensitive children as well. For example, if they are feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated because they don't feel safe for a variety of reasons. And it's not about physical safety, it's about emotional safety as well. It could be physical safety, but when I talk about safety, I'm talking about an overall safety, physical and emotional. They're both important. So if they're not feeling safe, they won't be able to focus and they will miss what the teacher has explained. And then they're sad and they're scared because they have this tendency to be a perfectionist and they want to do things right. And they want to do it right the first time. So they're very scared to make a mistake. And they're so scared to make a mistake that they might just freeze, and that's again a coping mechanism. So it's very important that the child, that you as a parent, that you advocate for your child. You go to the school from as early age as possible. But if you didn't learn that that your child is highly sensitive until they're 10 or 11 or beyond, it's okay. It's never too late. It's still good to learn and also go back and repair whatever it is that you need to repair with your child, because repairing for highly sensitive children is extremely important. And one of the things that I thought about when you were talking is that everything, all these negative talk to the child causes a lot of insecurity. And if we have insecurity, by the time we're an adult, if we have so many insecurities, guess what? We're not going to do as well as we would if we didn't have these insecurities. Having insecurity, to me, in my mind and with my experience, is a very strong reason for not doing your absolute best. You could still be successful in your career, but you could be 10 times more successful if you didn't have those insecurities to work through. And so it's really important as a parent to make sure that you don't, that you can't control other people. You can't control the teachers. You can't control friends and family members and things like that, but you can control yourself. So you want to make sure that you give the feedback to your child, the positive feedback to your child, as much as possible. Because for a highly sensitive child, and the feedback has to be accurate. So if you give fake feedback just to give them, positive feedback, it won't work for a highly sensitive child, because they're so smart and they're so in tune with your energy that they will know that you're being fake. And so it's important to give, honest feedback, but be careful to, like, you have to be giving them lots of positive feedback, because again, it's like the ADHD child, that they're not getting that in school. Unless you've gone to this, through the pain of explaining things to your teachers, which I highly recommend, and then tell them not to use, negative words with your children. Tell them to be, saying things in a kind and gentle way, because highly sensitive children don't do well with harshness. They don't do well with punishment. You have to be gentle with them, and gentleness, it gets you a long ways. You might think that, oh, if I'm gentle, then they'll get away with murder. No, it's not the case for highly sensitive children. And so that's very important. Advocacy for for your child is extremely important, anywhere, really, not just in schools, but even with their medical doctors, with their dentists. Everybody should know, whoever is engaged with your child, family members, caregivers, they should know about your child having high sensitivity. And what can you do? Because every child is unique. So just because I'm highly sensitive and my brother is highly sensitive doesn't mean that we need the same things. We definitely are unique in our own ways, and we need different things to be successful in life. So you need to know what that is for your child. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you that you have the power to create a bright and successful future for your highly sensitive child. Embrace their uniqueness, nurture their strengths, and provide them with the love and support they need. Together, we can pave a path to success that aligns with their sensitivity. Thank you for joining us today. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. We'll be here with more insights and inspirations in our next episode. Until then, keep believing in your child's potential because they truly are extraordinary. Stay tuned, stay inspired, and stay committed to setting your child up for success in life. To book a private coaching session with me, please visit my website at parentinghsc.com.